Welcome back to the Infertility Feelings Podcast, your place to process, cry, and laugh about infertility. We are so happy to have you here, and we hope you enjoyed today's conversation.
Anny, welcome back to the podcast. How are you feeling?
Great.
We are so glad that you are here, and we are really excited for today's conversation. Today we're talking about anxiety and infertility. Your two favorite things to talk about, right?
I do love talking about it.
Yeah. You do.
I think as we begin this year, really, and this new chapter of talking about infertility on the Infertility Feelings Podcast, we wanted to start all these conversations with something that is very important for people because they're dealing with it all the time. And the idea is stress, because we are all stressed out. All of us in general are stressed out, but when you are struggling to conceive, you are definitely stressed out. So we wanted to start by addressing that.
Great.
And I think the thing that I'm thinking most about is when you're going through a struggle of infertility or any kind of experience with infertility, you are marked by stress all the time. The month-by-month testing, the month-by-month trying, the 2-week wait, the doctor's appointment, the surgery, all of it is stressful. But I think there's times when we can look inward and say, I'm more than stressed, I'm anxious, or I'm dealing with anxiety. And I think I'd love to try to clear all that stuff up in the beginning here, because how do we know when we're stressed? How do we know when we're just in an anxiety-provoking situation? Or how do we know when we're really dealing with almost an ongoing type of anxiety? Because I think the way we deal with all three of those things would probably be different.
Well,
so if you could just clear that up, Anny.
So there you go. Button that up.
Solved. So stress and anxiety have a lot of similarities, but
Okay.
they also have a lot of differences. And
Okay.
so let's just unpack that a little bit.
Yeah.
So the physical response and in some ways emotional response to stress and anxiety is very similar, and so it can be very challenging to tell the difference. The key difference is that stress, we all experience it.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a reaction to something that just is a little overwhelming, that we're not really sure exactly how to respond, or it's just a little too much. That's just kind of regular stress. Obviously, there's chronic stress, which can easily happen with infertility. With anxiety, if you have no stress or very little stress, you can still experience anxiety. So anxiety is going to be there without stress.
Okay.
Whoa, wait a minute.
Okay, wait, let's first, can we first get a clear idea of what like events are stressful? I mean, for me, I know, driving could be stressful, like traffic is stressful. Mm-hmm. Is that what you're talking about when you say stress?
So there's so many different stressors.
Okay.
And what stresses me, it may not stress you, and vice versa.
Okay.
So for some people, traffic doesn't stress them. It actually is an opportunity to
zone out.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Or text. We're all texting and driving.
Yeah. Hopefully not, Doug.
Hopefully not texting.
Traffic, I mean, that is actually something that totally triggers me is traffic.
Yeah.
So it just depends on what stresses you out. So infertility is something that's going to stress anybody out. There's really no way to get through something really challenging like infertility that doesn't create stress.
Right.
It would actually be a little abnormal to go through that process and just be totally calm and at peace all the time, because like you said, there's so many factors to it, and each piece of that is stressful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Would it be fair to say that some parts are more stressful than other parts for people, and that's going to change
with infertility?
Yeah.
Yes, definitely.
Okay.
So for some, like for me, the waiting, that's what was the most stressful to me. It wasn't so much even the process and the different things we had to go through. Mm-hmm. It was the waiting. Mm-hmm. That was the most stressful part for me. Whereas for other people, the waiting wasn't as difficult as it was the procedures. So I do think it totally depends. And I think the struggle that people can have is because they spoke to so-and-so whose struggle was the waiting, and yet theirs is something different, it makes it kind of confusing. Like, I'm supposed to be stressed, or, I shouldn't be stressed over this. The whole idea of downplaying your stress because it's not what this person experienced, I think can be really not only difficult, but it can be unhealthy because then we're ignoring or we're downplaying how it's impacting us.
Or do people downplay other people's stress?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I think it goes
So
both
you're like,
ways.
for me, I had this procedure and it was crazy. And then someone says, I had to wait for this long. And they're like, well, that's not as stressful because.
Yeah, we definitely tend to
we rank
judge other people's experience.
Yes.
And that doesn't help us either, right? I think a lot of
Right.
times we do that because we want to feel better about ourselves.
Right.
And yet it really doesn't feel good to do that.
Right.
Like
So-
mine was like, I didn't want to adult this
Right.
situation. I just wanted to be like, I don't want to do that. And
Yeah.
just kind of
Yeah.
be like that. But like the waiting wasn't so bad for me until IVF.
Okay.
Because we had so much more involved with
Right.
it. We had money.
The
We had
investment,
people
yeah.
thinking about us. We had shots, all this stuff. I had done acupuncture. So I really didn't feel like I felt the weight of the waiting until then. That's what I think is also interesting, is
Yeah.
it can change.
Right.
Month after month when we were trying, the 2-week wait wasn't that big of a deal to me because I was so distracted or about other things or whatever. Or it just wasn't that big of a deal.
Right.
But when it was IVF, it was like, oh, this has got to work.
Right.
So I'm going to think about
Yeah.
this every second, every millisecond of my 2 weeks,
Right.
the whole
Right.
time.
Right. That's true. The things that stressed us out individually were totally different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was like a whiny, like toddler. I felt like it's like, I don't want to go
And-
take blood.
And that's what stressed me out. No, I'm just joking.
And therein lies my stress.
Infertility didn't stress me out. It was
Yeah, it's
mostly
my
just
life.
you.
Yeah, me.
No,
I tend to
I'm
do that
joking.
well.
No, it's true. I mean, depending on who you are as a person,
Right.
it totally changes.
What was
Yes.
yours?
And-
I want to know.
To me, the what it meant, like I think actually probably what I was dealing with maybe felt like more of like a triggering of the things that do make me anxious, which is maybe I think why I think this conversation is important is when we didn't have our options explored, I felt really stressed out. So when we would meet with the doctor or just sit down together to think about what are we doing next, that's where I felt the most stressed.
Okay.
Trying to plan out what we're doing in the future and not feeling rock solid about it when we walked away, that's where I felt the most stressed. Was
Which
I hate
fits your personality.
Yeah, I didn't like those situations
Yeah.
where it was like, should we do another round of IVF? What are our percentages? And we're going over that kind of stuff. Really stressed me out. I didn't want
And
to
I
do
think
that.
what makes it extra challenging is because with infertility, you're usually dealing with two people.
Right.
And oftentimes
We're different.
And so really what stresses you out may, and then to provide all these statistics and to provide this plan
Yeah.
works for you and lowers your stress, but it may increase your stress, right? And so again, that's a whole nother level of stress that's added to this process.
Yeah.
I think what's really important is, first of all, we know ourselves. As we get to know ourselves better, we're going to be more aware, self-aware of what triggers us and
Right.
what
Right.
causes us stress.
Yep.
I think the other part, which has really been fascinating for me recently, is I was in a car accident and I really didn't think it was a bad car accident, and I really minimized it. I really thought, I'm okay, everything's going to be okay.
Right. You walked away.
Right.
It's all fine.
Did you minimize it to yourself or to people around
Both.
you?
And
Okay.
I think because it could have been so much worse, that's what I kept saying to myself, but it could have been so much worse. So I minimized it. And it wasn't until I started talking about it with my community that I realized how stressful it was for me, that I would just start sobbing and just talking about the accident. And I thought, oh, wow, this has impacted me much more than I realized.
Right.
And I bring that up because I think that's what's so important about dealing with stress, is that if we don't talk about what we're going through, whether or not we think it's stressful, we may not understand how much it's impacting us. And that's why
Yeah.
community is so important, and to really allow ourselves to process it, whether it seems like it's bothering us or not, because we aren't aware. We don't realize how much it's impacting us until we start talking about it and processing it.
What you're describing is a universal problem, right? If you don't look at something, it becomes a different thing, right? I almost think about, this is a really weird parallel, but I think about almost like finances, right? Say you have like a credit card. Maybe you're like an 18-year-old.
Doug,
This is just
whoa.
my own personal story
like,
as myself.
yeah.
When I went to the Angel Stadium to go to a baseball game when I was 18, they said, hey, you can get a fleece blanket if you sign up for a credit card. And that's all
Beginning
you
of the
all you
end.
need to know about my financial history.
The beginning of
No,
the
but
end.
I remember. I think I racked up like $2,000 as like an 18-year-old. It was so dumb. I had to pay it off. But I remember thinking, I just buy stuff with it. I didn't even know you had to check, it's like I didn't really ever look at it. But once I looked at it, I went, oh, this is way worse than I thought it was. But in my mind, it was like, I know that it's probably not good, but I had written some story about it in my head that it was bad, but I didn't need to look at it. Once I really sat down and went, oh my gosh, this is bad, or it's bigger than I thought it was. I spent more than I thought it was. I think that idea is universal, right? If we have just don't look at things, they exist as a certain version of them in our own heads.
Right.
And I think stress is the same way.
Yes, and I think we do it both ways. Like one would be, I'm just going to kind of ignore this
until it goes away.
Right. Or I tend to think I have so much to do today. And I don't make a list. I just know I've got this, and this.
Yeah.
And I get overwhelmed. But if I were to actually write down and think, okay, how much time will each of these take? It's not that much.
Yeah.
Right.
So I think we go both ways. And that's why it's so important to process as much as we can.
Yeah.
Right.
To really work things out. And it doesn't have to necessarily even be, I've got to sit down with my person today and talk all through my day. You can journal, I think is a beautiful way to do it. But there's a lot of ways to process without necessarily sitting down with someone every single day and going through your day.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Because I have never seen a community, the grit and bear it community, like the infertility community. Like, let's grit, let's bear it, let's keep going. I am a strong warrior, which I think, yes, there is a lot of strength and courage and bravery that it takes to go down this road. But it's just so sad because then the process continues and goes on and on and on. And now we're grit and bearing it for a year and then 2 years and then 5 years. And it's like, and then it's just like, let's just put it in the closet. Let's just put it in the closet and just get over it. And if I have my baby, it'll all go away. And that's just so not true. Yeah. Would you agree?
Yes, I definitely agree. I do think that there are times where we do need to just kind of push through things, right? And just say, you know what? I know this is hard, but I'm going to do it, and I'm going to get through it.
Be where your feet are a little bit.
Right. And I think that there's real health to that.
Yeah.
But it's when we do it over and over again, or we get through that day or get through that week, and then we just, like you said, put it on a shelf. We have to process it, because if we wait 2 years, we're going to be dealing with a lot more. And so, I think it's kind of, it grows and grows.
I think you've said before that it's okay to put things on the shelf as long as we take them off the shelf.
Correct.
And I think that's really important, that it's okay to get through the day, get through a procedure, go to work. But if what you put up never comes back down, you get in the long run, you can run into, it falls down.
Yeah.
You don't take it down, it falls over.
Spewing, everything will start spewing. And I think it's so important that we shelf things, because that's how we can function in life, and that's how we can sleep at night.
Right.
But if we don't take it off the shelf pretty regularly, this box that we've put it in becomes bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and to where it's this huge thing. So I think compartmentalizing and putting things aside for a little bit is important so we can function, but you have to bring it down on a pretty regular basis.
Right. And we don't want to do it because it's painful.
Because it's painful. It's
But I do have so many people come up to me all the time and be like, I don't know, I was just talking to my coworker and I just started crying about my infertility, and I was so embarrassed because that's where it came out. And in my head, I'm like, right, because it's on the shelf, it's been staying on the shelf, and then one person asks you the right question in the right moment, and it's like, and it all comes spoiling out. And then now you're embarrassed. And I think it increases the isolation and increases the shame.
You have
of
less control of your emotions when it's been up there too long.
Right.
And also, though, I think that there are times in our lives where there is a trauma, there is something really difficult and painful, and we are going to spill out. And we're going to spill out where we're embarrassed. And that's going to happen sometimes, and it's okay.
Right.
Hopefully you're with somebody who's filled with grace.
Right.
So just because we spill over doesn't necessarily mean we're not processing. But I think when we put something on the shelf too long, we definitely will spill over.
Right.
Okay, to recap a little bit and move forward, I think we're on the same page when it comes to these stressful events. Life is full of stressful events. Each individual finds different things stressful. I think my question still is there, though. How do you know when you move from common, I guess, was a common stress to something that is anxiety, where you would say, I now have anxiety about this one thing. Are the words interchangeable?
No, they're not.
Okay.
People interchange them all the time, and I
Right.
totally understand that, and I don't think that's a huge deal normally.
Okay.
But I also hear even how you're wording it.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a stress becomes anxiety.
Okay.
Stress
Whoa.
is separate.
That was huge.
Anxiety's separate.
Okay.
Okay, so you can be
What
stressed.
what differentiates them?
It's all, I think, how I would say, describe it is that anxiety is a sense of dread and what if.
Okay.
Stress is, oh my gosh, I'm totally overwhelmed.
Okay.
Huh.
There really is a big difference
That
between
is
the two.
different, yeah.
You can be totally stressed and have no anxiety.
I don't know. I can't personally.
No, I can't either.
I can.
But I think
I can.
I'm trying to distinguish between the two.
That's so
Yeah.
good though.
And
Yeah.
Now, I think most people are anxious about stressful situations.
Okay.
If you're an anxious person, you and I can relate to that.
Yeah.
But if you talk to somebody who's not very anxious,
Yeah.
the stress, it's stress.
Yeah.
And it
Yeah.
affects them physically, it affects them emotionally, but
Yeah.
it doesn't necessarily mean they're anxious.
Okay.
So you don't want to say stress becomes anxiety. That's not how it works.
Okay, that's good
Okay.
to know. Yeah.
You can have stress and anxiety at the same time. You can have overwhelming stress can actually create anxiety. That is true.
Yeah.
Um,
Can you
but
be
it's-
anxious about how stressed you've been in certain areas? Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And I do think most of the time they go together in the sense that when you're stressed, your anxiety increases.
Yeah.
So if you're more of an anxious person, stress is definitely going to create more anxiety.
Yeah.
But I want to separate them because I think it's important to know you can be stressed without necessarily experiencing anxiety.
Yeah.
It really is two different things.
What would be the simple definition of both? Then it's like stress is just like daily events or like just a moment of overwhelmed.
Stress would be, I'm going to do my best to give you a great definition.
Right.
Stress is events or even interpretation of events that you feel a little overwhelmed or a lot overwhelmed, where you have to, you're struggling with how to respond. Okay. So, there's a lot of things that happen in our lives that create a little bit of stress, but we know how to respond, and we do, and then we're over it. Okay? There's stress that's bigger, that's a little more overwhelming. Like, for example, if you're stressed about a test, you have a test tomorrow, you're stressed, the stress hopefully is going to create this, oh, I need to study. And you're going to study for the test, you're going to take the test, the stress is over. Now, if you're more anxious, you're going to be anxious about the test because what you're going to say is, well, what if I fail? What if I fail? What if I fail?
Right.
Okay.
The difference is anxiety is saying, what if? The stress is, wow, I got to study for this because I want to do well. Can
Yeah.
you kind of see the difference between that?
Yeah.
I totally do.
Yeah.
It makes me think on the lowest level, like the things that are minorly stressful, I think like buying plane tickets, you're like, I want to make sure my name is right and make sure the dates are all right. And you're a little bit more attentive and it's very situational to where you're in. And it motivates all sorts of different actions.
Right. Which can be good, right? Stress can be
Right.
good.
I want to
A
make
little
sure your
bit.
name's right. So
Right.
you don't
Yeah,
mess it
yeah.
up.
You want to study for your test.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, you're like, I want to prepare and all those kind of things. Anxiety to me seems to have no object to it. It's about the thing. It's not really
Excellent.
in it, if
That's
that makes sense. Like
excellent.
it's only
Yeah.
surrounding it. It's
Right.
like I'm worried about the studying. I'm worried about getting it right. But it doesn't necessarily motivate any action. It just like, I don't know, hurts the individual or me.
Right.
Yeah.
And remember, anxiety is very physical. Anxiety in particular is not just emotional, it's physical. When we're feeling anxious, right, our heart rate tends to increase, our breathing becomes shallow and quick. There's a lot of things that happen. Our stomachs might hurt or our muscles tense up. There's a physical response to anxiety. Stress, now I'm not saying you don't have some anxious symptoms.
When I'm
with
overwhelmed,
stress.
I can get a little, heart racy a little bit.
Yeah. But stress doesn't necessarily bring forth the physical symptoms that anxiety does. It kind of can be just this awareness of, oh, I gotta do this.
Right.
Whereas anxiety is, but what if?
Right. Which is infertility 101.
Yeah.
What if? What if? What if?
And
What
it's
if?
really hard to not be anxious during infertility for most people because it is, right?
Right.
It is so much a what if.
Right. And that is the word. I am anxious is probably the number one thing I hear in the infertility community and
Okay.
people sharing, how are you doing? I'm anxious. I'm anxious. I'm anxious.
Guys, this is my therapy session right now.
Yes. Doug, I've brought Annie here for you.
This really isn't about you guys. This is about their
Yes.
therapy.
No,
But that's so
I think
true.
it's the reason that I wanted to, the reason this conversation is important, I think, is because we live in a world where language is thrown around all the time. And that's not bad. But stress, anxiety becomes the same thing. And I think we have a hard time figuring out how to respond to anxiety or how to respond to stress. And if they're the same thing in our mind, it can be difficult to figure out how to respond to it because everyone knows you get stressed. And it's not necessarily a bad thing to get stressed because it's stressful situations.
Right. It causes you to respond, to act.
Yes.
To act.
But anxiety feels like something, and living in anxiety feels like something you don't want to do. And it doesn't feel natural, right? So we're wanting to respond to it. But the first thing, which we've been so lovingly taken to school today, thank you, Annie, is that they are different. And that even noticing in our own journeys, whether it's, honestly, it's like so universal, whether it's just your life or in infertility, that stress is present and anxiety is present, but it's not a progressive thing.
Correct.
It's not like they exist on the same line, if that makes sense.
And I think that those of us who experience more anxiety, stress produces anxiety. That increases my anxiety. So I want to make it clear that anxious people usually respond to stress with anxiety.
That's the next question is, do we respond the same? Like, if you're stressed, do you have the same response? If you're anxious, do you have the same response? I think probably people probably could pause right now and just journal out moments where they've felt stressed or where they feel anxious. I feel like I want to go back and be like, was I stressed there or am I anxious?
That's a great
Well,
exercise.
Yeah, and I feel like so powerful. Am I worried about the what if?
Yeah.
That I feel like is a
great
very
question for
key
it.
thing
Yeah.
to be like, am I stressed because I'm having an egg retrieval tomorrow and it's a lot and I have to get up early and I have to do my thing and whatever? Or is it like, am I just worried, what if this doesn't work?
Yeah.
What if?
And there's a good chance you have both.
Right,
Yeah.
right,
That you
right.
were dealing with both.
Right.
And therefore, there's certain things that are similar, what you would want to do for both, for each one.
Yeah.
And then there's some very specific things to do for anxiety versus stress. So
Because I would say,
Tell us,
for me,
Annie.
when you say, like I'm stressed about the egg retrieval tomorrow, and I'm also wondering like, what if, the what if in my mind, like for me, way outweighs the actual stress of the retrieval. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like the anxiety piece of it goes way higher than the stress almost ever would,
And,
That's so funny because I'm the opposite.
yeah.
Yeah.
I
I'm
think
like,
that's super insightful
stress.
to know that about yourself.
yeah,
It's
I'm
like,
like more
the-
stressed about doing it. And
Yeah.
and then I'll be like, we'll think about it when that happens. If it doesn't work, we'll deal with that when that happens.
Right.
I'm still a little anxious, but it's like, we'll deal with that.
Right. It's like it's a stressful situation, but my response and the the places that I'm going they're not necessarily in step with how stressful it is. I'm like, what is the point of life? Maybe I should quit my job. Let's move countries and sell windmills or what.
Now
just like,
people can see what I live with on my daily life.
but that's what the anxiety does.
Right.
You throw so much
A
out.
lot of irrationality. For
Yeah,
sure.
it's not even really about. It's loosely attached to the thing that you're stressed about. So I guess that's the question: is how do you respond to
Yeah.
is the response the same or is it different?
So I think it's both. I think
Okay.
there are certain things that work for both, and there are things specifically that work better for anxiety versus stress.
Yeah,
So stress, there's lots of, developing coping skills to be able to handle. Like you've probably all met somebody who doesn't handle stress well, right? They just
Yes.
kind of like fall apart about any little thing that they have to deal
Right.
with.
none of you are that, I'm sure.
Well, we tend to see it in the little, younger generation.
Yeah,
Yeah. I know what you're
So-
saying. Yes.
So I think that part of dealing with stress is really developing skills,
Yeah.
coping skills to handle life.
yeah,
That's not so much true with anxiety because anxiety is so much more about our thought process. And so it's not so much developing skills to change our thought processes, although there's a little bit of that. It's really more developing an ability to think more rational, to think more with truth versus allowing yourself to be taken over by the emotional part and then start being irrational and like you saying, let's move and sell windmills.
Yeah.
That's a little irrational.
Just a tiny bit.
Well, that's interesting. So if you're stressed, would you say calming tools are good?
Yeah,
Or coping.
and you know what? That's exactly would be the same. So
Okay.
for stress and anxiety, I would say relaxation techniques help with both.
Okay.
Right? Deep breathing,
Yeah.
muscle relaxation, mindfulness, meditation. Those are kind of things that are going to help you with both.
But maybe for anxiety, there's something else that's needed.
So
it's not just calming down.
Correct. Anxiety,
Okay.
you would definitely want to add the cognitive kind of techniques. So thought stopping, worry time, and really, I think key is understanding where your anxiety is coming from. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
What's interesting for me, my husband's not an anxious person. I'm an anxious person, and so when we kind of collaborate. When I'm feeling anxious, it's fascinating to me to hear his more logical response to the situation.
Right.
And it helps me to say, oh, I didn't even think of that.
Yeah.
And so that's cognitive. That's thinking through, okay, wait a second. Is this the what ifs? It's asking the what ifs is rarely helpful.
Right.
Now, anxious people do it all the time,
Right.
but it's rarely helpful.
Right.
Yeah.
Because if you think about, let's just talk about the 2-week waiting period.
Yes.
You have the stress of that. That's real. This anxiety is real too. And you're saying, well, what if I don't get pregnant? What if I don't get pregnant?
Right.
For 2 weeks, you're making yourself crazy thinking, what if I don't get pregnant?
Right.
Yeah.
Does that change the outcome?
No.
No.
No. If anything, it just adds so much more stress
Right.
Yeah.
because you're so worried all the time. It doesn't change the outcome. What benefit is there in this what if thinking for 2 weeks?
Right.
Can you think of any?
No.
No.
No. It's not like stress where you say, I can do something about this.
Right.
The what
Yeah.
ifs don't trigger action.
Right.
Right.
It just triggers this repetitive, kind of emotional, physical even response.
So what would you say to someone? What would you say to someone? Because I've literally heard this. I try not to do that and I can't help it.
Oh, absolutely.
That's exactly what I was going to ask.
Like,
It's like,
I feel like they're all like, I try not to think about it. I go running. I go and
Right.
go watch a movie, and all of a sudden I'm thinking about it. And then there's reminders. The girl's pregnant on the
Right.
screen or whatever.
or I even feel like our current, I don't know, the current state of the internet even is just like to make jokes about it and just succumb to it and be like,
Right.
there's
I'm
nothing you
anxious.
can do about it, you know?
Well, it's funny because, there's this really great show that the lady goes to the psychologist and she tells him this kind of horrific thing that she's afraid of. And he's like, well, stop it.
Yeah.
Stop it. You've probably
Right.
seen it.
Yeah.
And that would be so great if we could just do that. If we
Right.
could just
Yeah.
stop it just because someone told us to.
Right.
Don't be afraid. Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I
don't be
didn't think
anxious.
of that.
Right. Exactly.
So just saying that in no way makes it stop.
Right.
But what
Yeah.
it tells you is, if you're doing a lot of the what ifs, is there's an issue that has to be dealt with.
right.
That we have to take this and say, what is happening inside of me? What is triggering? What is, maybe there's trauma, to
Yeah.
explore, why is it that I think this way? Why
Right.
is it that I always go directly to worst case scenario or the what ifs? And so you have to explore it. You have to understand where it's coming from. Otherwise, it's going to be really challenging just to stop doing it.
Right. And that's where a lot of fear is.
Right.
Oh no, my worst fear will come true.
Right.
And when we did IVF, and I was so anxious like never before because we had so much more involved with it. It was like why I didn't want to stop thinking about the what ifs is because I was afraid the what ifs were going to come true.
Right. And so I think what we do is we think, if I think about it, I won't be so disappointed if it happens.
Yes.
Like I'm preparing myself.
Totally.
And I totally get that. I can relate to that.
Right.
But at the same time, it doesn't change the facts. And what it does is it stresses our bodies out. Anxiety, and this stress does this as well, it really has an impact on our bodies, because if it's stress, we oftentimes do have that same physical response as anxiety.
Yeah.
And when we're in that fight, flight, or freeze response all the time, it's really hard on our brains and our bodies.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's why it's so important to be able to at least acknowledge, hey, I've got an issue here that I need to deal with.
Right.
I think it's very easy if we have something physical going on that we say, oh, I'm going to go to the doctor and deal with this and find out what's going on.
Yeah.
Whereas if it's an emotional thing, we tend to, that feels scary, that feels
Right.
big. And so we kind of just ignore it or put it on the shelf.
Right.
And really our mental health is just as important as our physical health in many ways.
I totally feel exactly what you're saying, in that when you're in a stressful situation, your body responds to the stressful situation. Your heart rate goes up, and all sorts of things happen, but it's very appropriate, a lot of times, to the situation that you're in. Jesse and I joke a lot. If I'm feeling anxious, it's really not connected to anything that would give you stress. You sit down for a nice meal and it's a Tuesday night and it's calm. The neighborhood's quiet. You hear some birds chirping and you're like, I think I'm panicking,
I always
and
say
Jesse's
Doug
like,
makes
what? It's a Tuesday.
I always say Doug makes a Tuesday nervous.
But to me, that's a telltale sign of anxiety. Is nothing in my current situation should be provoking me to this level of stress.
Right.
It's something mental or internal, because I am as if we're about to walk into the doctor's office, or as if we're in this situation when it's just Tuesday. It's like a Tuesday and we're eating dinner and everything is fine.
Right. That's a perfect example of stress. When you take the stressor out, there's still anxiety.
Yeah.
Right. So that's a telltale sign right there.
Yeah.
Is if when the stress calms down, which it really needs to, even I know infertility, because you're constantly dealing with stuff, your stress level is very high. But chronic stress is so bad for us. I mean, if you look at the research and what it does to our bodies, it's disturbing. And so it's so important that we do the best we can with developing coping skills. The reality is we are going to have stressful situations, traumatic situations. We can't help it.
Can't get out of it.
But what we want to do is develop the coping skills as much as we can, develop resilience so that it impacts us a little less and that we can handle it better. And putting that aside with the stress and then the anxiety part of being able to say, okay, I need to be able to think more rational, think more truth-filled, because it's not helping me.
At this point, I really do think we get to the core of this conversation, and maybe the hardest part to deal with when we're talking about stress and anxiety. I think that is, we have to take perhaps a different stance towards anxiety. It's not like stress where we apply our calming tools. There's something else going on. There's something motivating this feeling that needs to be looked at. And it's different than stress. It's different than the everyday, day in, day out, hard feelings of going through infertility. And I think that's difficult, right? Like that's a sad moment to go, oh my gosh, infertility is bringing out a lot of anxiety in me. And now I got to sit with that. And that's difficult. So I think if there's a core motivation for making this having this conversation and making this podcast today, is that we want people to walk away thinking anxiety is something that needs to be addressed and faced. And if you're having an undue amount of it, you have to take a certain stance towards it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It's like, what do you do with the what ifs? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, it's like if you're constantly getting them, I think there's something that needs to be addressed beyond the calming tools, which those are good. We need to do those.
Right.
But there's something else that needs to be added.
And I would think that like the biggest thing would be, what do we do with those what ifs? So we're in it. We know it's stressful. We're using our coping things with that. Maybe that's exercise or whatever that is for you. And then it's like, but now we're still anxious and we're in a 2-week wait and we're sitting here and we're still having these what ifs. And I can't think my way out of it. I can't think, okay, I'll just stop thinking about it. It's still continuing. We're still in this anxious response.
Yeah.
What do we do about that, Annie?
We have more. Yeah. Keep going,
Can you
Annie.
tell us?
Tell us everything. We're so aggressive towards you. Annie is the nicest human being on planet.
You better give us the right answer.
She is the nicest human ever. No, but I think that is a question. What's our stance towards it?
That's a key question.
Yeah.
You know what? I think that I will share. As I've shared before, I have been an anxious person most of my life. As a child, I was anxious. I do think temperamentally, I am an anxious person. In addition to that, there's a lot of other things that have created and added to my anxiety, many of which is trauma, many of which is just really difficult situations. So I think to really get at our anxiety, we have to look at what's underneath it.
Right.
Very difficult, very challenging. and time consuming.
Yeah.
Someone who does the what ifs every day and I tell them stop doing that, it doesn't do anything.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's not, even if with all of the different things I'm going to mention, it's not going to change overnight. It's not going to change in a week.
Right.
I have worked through my anxiety for a long time, and I can tell you I still experience anxiety, but the key is that when I do the what if, I don't go down the rabbit hole anymore. I can catch catch myself before it goes to a dark place.
Yeah.
And so that's the goal, is to be able to catch it and turn it around and basically take control over your thoughts.
Right.
Yeah.
Again, that takes a lot of practice and a lot of hard work. I know so often we say, well, do this and do that. And you hear it all the time, even the infertility stuff. Oh, well, you just relax or just do this or just that.
Yeah.
And it's like, that is just killing me.
Right.
It killed me when people would say stuff like that.
Right.
So I don't want to at all sound like this is easy or a quick fix. It isn't.
Yeah. Is there almost a perspective change that needs to happen
Absolutely,
with the person who's maybe struggling with anxiety, thinking, I need to shift my perspective. This isn't going to be do a quick few things. It's, I need to address the deeper issues.
Yeah. It's a life change. It's a life change as far as our changing the way we think. It's kind of like, have you ever heard someone, that's just really fit and really healthy, and they say, oh, it's a lifestyle.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh my God.
Right.
But there's
I wish my lifestyle was okay to just eat chips all the time. That's my lifestyle.
I really don't feel like doing that or that.
Right. Right.
But it's similar in the sense that it really is, you develop these habits of thinking a certain way and again, it takes work.
Right.
So I can give you some ideas.
Yeah. What would be the work you would say?
Okay. And I'm going to tell you those, but I also want to say especially someone who's kind of considers himself an anxious person. And what I mean by that is, even if you have no self-awareness of that, that meaning that you are anxious a lot,
Right.
Even when stress is gone, you have anxious thoughts.
Right.
You have to look at what is behind that, what's underneath. So it means looking at your trauma. It means looking at your emotional wounds.
Yeah.
Because what happens is, especially infertility, because it's so stressful and because it is somewhat traumatic, it's triggering your previous traumas. We've kind of talked about this, I think, on another podcast.
We have.
Yep.
And
but people need to hear it again, Annie. We'll just beat them over the head with it.
So if you don't deal with your trauma, if you don't deal with your emotional wounds, they are going to fester.
What would you say? Define deal.
So deal would be process, and processing to me would be probably the best if I had to pick one word for it.
Right.
Processing.
And like maybe even just like looking at them. If you don't look at what's happened to you.
Look at it and really you have to talk about it.
Yeah.
Dealing and processing means you have to talk about it. Journaling is fantastic. I encourage everyone to journal.
Yeah.
But that's not enough. You have to have a community that you can really process, talk about, work through, share your narrative.
Yeah.
Right.
And if you don't have that person or people in your life, then you get a therapist to help you process it.
Yeah.
Because if you don't, it's going to fester, and it's going to, every time you're dealing with something that creates anxiety, you're going to go right back to where you were 10 years ago, 20 years ago, whatever it was, where you had that trauma, where you had that wound.
Right. Right.
So to really deal with the core of anxiety is going back. And I know that's super scary. I know that's super painful and hard for some people, but it really is where we get our healing. And I want to encourage people, because when you do that, life is different. Life is different when we get true healing. And so it's worth that journey. It's not going to be easy, but it is worth the journey.
You really truly can tell there's a difference between anxiety and stress when you explain it like that.
Right.
I don't think anyone in a stressful situation would go, okay, I need to go back and look at what's happened to me, look at the areas where I've been, traumatized and process what's happened to me. No one would do that in traffic, You wouldn't, I don't know if that would be your response. But when you're laying in bed at night, ruminating on the what ifs, and you can't go to sleep, I think there is a little bit something inside of us that goes, I need to figure out I need to figure out why I'm doing this, where this is coming from. I hope that's a huge. We always say this. We talk about these things on this podcast that just feel like, oh, just do that.
Yeah,
do it
check
tonight.
that off the list.
Just go for that tonight.
Yeah,
They're
resilient.
huge.
You'll be very resilient by the end
Those
of it.
are huge life
Right.
changes. And I just want to acknowledge that if you're even listening to this and thinking, maybe I am kind of an anxious person, maybe I need to do that, that's a big deal. If you walk away from this conversation thinking, I probably should address my anxiety, that is huge. I mean, I would say be proud of yourself. Like that's a really big step to even just say like, I want to look at that a little more.
Step.
Right.
I kind of say we're all not okay sometimes, right? We all go through situations where we're not okay, and it's okay to be not okay.
Right.
It's not okay to stay there. And so we have to be willing to do the work. And I think, and that's not true with just anxiety. That's true with depression. I mean, a lot of people in infertility are depressed because they're going through it. And I also want to say that the stress of infertility is very unique.
Yeah.
Because infertility oftentimes triggers past experiences.
Yeah.
Which I never knew that until I started Uniquely Needed. I'm serious.
Okay.
Like I didn't realize because I actually
how much I didn't realize how much it would,
how much it would like trigger me to back old experiences.
I mean, if you think about what infertility can trigger, right?
Right.
I mean, there's all kinds of issues. You have sex,
Right.
you have marriage, you have communication, you have any physical trauma you've had.
Right.
It really, there's a lot of things that can get connected to infertility. So I do think that the stress of infertility is significant and very unique.
Right.
So chances are most people going through infertility are getting some stuff triggered from their past.
Right. I totally agree. That's what we do in our program.
Yep.
Is we have them say 3 life-defining events first when they share, and then they share their infertility story. And I am blown away how many times they are connected, or how many times they say the 3 life events, and then they say their infertility story, and then they're like, oh, I'm realizing that's going in the moment as they're sharing. They're like, I'm realizing that's how I'm very type A person, and I'm a type A person, and I got all my things very easily to me, and then I'm getting this, and it's not coming easily to me, and I'm having like an identity crisis. And you're like, yes, connected. Yeah, it's amazing to me.
It's really important.
Right.
So I will say, really dealing with anxiety is dealing with
the past,
our wounds.
Yeah. And processing through them, would you say?
And processing with it. Yes. Yes. Right. I even think just being able to acknowledge, oh my gosh, like you just said, oh my gosh, that totally, as I think about that experience, just that I think can be super helpful. Yeah. More so though, if you're willing to just take that and then open that up and say, wow, let me kind of think through what happened and let me talk it through with somebody. And, I remember when I was sharing with somebody some of my challenges, my emotional wounds from childhood, and I said, oh, it was no big deal. And my friend said, Annie, that it is a big deal. Yeah. And I thought, if I were a child, if a child was telling me that story, I would have reacted very differently.
Right.
We tend to minimize what's happened in the past because we got through it. So I think being able to look at it, maybe even from a perspective of if a child told you that story,
right,
would you say, oh, it's no big deal?
Right.
You would say, wow, let's work through this. Let's talk about it more. Let's cry over it, or let's, just depending on what the person needs. So
that's why community is so important, because it's the biggest mirror. We've seen that too. And when someone shares their story and then someone reflects back, wow, I was really angry in that part. That made me feel really angry for you. Or I got teary at this part. The person's like, oh, you got angry? Oh, like it just like helps exactly what you were just saying.
Yeah.
I feel like my biggest hope in this podcast is that people would be able to see that they can experience a 2-week wait differently, or they can experience infertility differently. And I feel like this is how we can do that. It's like when you're struggling with infertility, especially in those late nights of being on your phone and not being able to sleep, and you're Googling and you're like on these boards where you're trying to like figure out your numbers and am I doing this vitamin right? It's like we're really searching for control. That's what we're control. We're trying to get control. But we hear it all the time. We can only control ourselves. That's the only thing we can control. But we put so much weight in this Googling thing and Googling and all that and trying to figure it out and control it. And that's probably just brewing anxiety. Would you say, Annie?
Well, I do think though, when we're trying to control things, right, that is how we tend to deal with anxiety. Or that's where anxiety is created. We don't have a sense of control.
Right.
Yeah. We're searching for it.
We're searching for it. But if all we can control in ourselves is having stressful situations, having good coping skills, having anxiety, dealing with the past, that might change our outcome.
Yeah.
That could change our outcome.
If we poured our energy into that.
If we poured our energy into that, that could not change the outcome of you being pregnant or not pregnant or whatever, but change the experience, how you're experiencing it. Exactly.
Yeah. I always say interpretation's everything.
Yes.
If you think about, especially an anxious person versus a non-anxious person, their interpretation of the same exact event is going to be different.
Right.
Mine's going to be what if, and my husband's might be, well, it's because of this.
Right.
So interpretation's everything. And I think it's challenging, but if we can allow ourselves and maybe need some help coming up with different ideas of how can you interpret this differently, and that fits in with one of the exercises techniques, is thinking, okay, this is how I'm interpreting this situation. Oh my gosh, I can't survive if I don't get pregnant this time. Okay, how else can you interpret that? How else can you interpret this 2-week waiting period that if you don't get pregnant? What might be another way to look at that you actually might survive? You could actually survive that. And so just kind of think about, brainstorm, how can I think of this differently? How can I think of, develop, maybe even say, you know what? I actually have some coping skills. I can respond this way. I can respond this way. I've been through this 3 months now, or 2 years now, whatever it is, and I'm going to survive it. I'm going to be okay.
Right.
Again, just kind of thinking through, how can I look at this and think of it as a little different than I am? Because how I'm thinking of it is creating a significant anxiety, and I'm physically feeling sick by it.
So the journey of dealing and looking at anxiety when it comes to infertility, I really think is going to be a self-reflection. What are the moments where we're not just stressed with the moment that we're in, but living in that world of what if, staying up late, ruminating on it, when all things are calm and we're riled up and wondering what will the future look like, what will things go, how will things go. I think the journey that we have ahead of us, the task really that we have ahead of us, is an inward one. Looking back, looking at who we are as people, what happened to us, what things are significant to us, and how can we bring those things into the present, in the presence of a really safe community that can help us deal with them, help us process them, probably cry about them, see them in a different light. And the more that we do that, I think the more we confront and deal with the anxiety that's in our life.
Yeah.
Anny, thank you so much for always being so wonderful and enlightening us.
You're welcome. It's great being with you guys.
Thank you for listening to the Infertility Feelings Podcast, a show produced by the nonprofit Uniquely Knitted. This is your place to process, cry, and laugh about infertility. We are so grateful to all of our wonderful donors who support this work. If you would like to learn more about how we serve the community and support the work of Uniquely Knitted, we encourage you to check us out at uniquelyknitted.org. If you enjoy this podcast and would like more people to hear it, please give us a rating and a comment in Apple Podcasts. This is the best way for more people to hear these conversations. If you need to talk to someone about your feelings, please reach out to us. We are here to help you. If you would like to learn more about our unique process groups, please follow the link in our show notes. See you guys next week.